The wind moaned across the moor like a dying woman. Inside Vane Abbey, ancient and frost-rimed, the clocks had just chimed 11 when Sir Hugh Vane raised his glass of brandy in a mocking toast to his assembled household. To truth, he sneered, however inconvenient. He drank. 10 minutes later, he was on the turkey carpet, limbs rigid, spine arched in the terrible bow of strychnine poisoning, foam flecking his lips. Someone in that room had planned this death down to the last grain. And Hercule Poirot, dining only 6 miles away, was about to receive the telephone call that would draw him into the darkest house in Devon. Chapter 1. The summons in the night. The wind that night was a living thing. It prowled across the high moor like a starving wolf, rattling the leaded windows of the White Hart Hotel in Chudley as though it resented any creature warm and breathing. Inside the best bedroom, a relative term in a Devonshire inn of 1936, a small green-shaded lamp burned on the night table, throwing a pool of light across the counterpane and the immaculate mustaches of Hercule Poirot. He was reading, or pretending to read, a slender volume of Baudelaire. In truth, he was listening, to the wind, to the creak of old beams, to the uneasy silence that always precedes violent death. Poirot had long ago learned that the universe announces its catastrophes in advance, if only one possesses ears delicate enough to hear. At 17 minutes past 1, the telephone bell rang, a shrill, imperative sound that made even the valet George flinch in the adjoining dressing room. Poirot laid the book aside with the precision of a man setting down a loaded revolver. He rose, slipped his feet into green Morocco slippers with his monogram worked in gold, and enveloped his small, compact person in a dressing gown of quilted emerald silk. Only then did he lift the receiver. "Allô? Ici Hercule Poirot." The wire crackled like burning thorns. A voice he knew well came through, urgent, stripped of its usual Scotland Yard pomposity. "Poirot? Thank God, it's Jap. Can you hear me?" "Perfectly, mon vieux, though I confess the hour is not one I habitually choose for conversation." "Never mind that. Sir Hugh Vane is dead. Vane Abbey, 6 miles west of you. Strychnine. The local man is a fool and the family doctor talks of suicide. Suicide, mark you, when the fellow was writhing like a hooked worm in front of 5 witnesses. I'm coming down on the milk train, but I need you now tonight. Say you'll come." Poirot's eyes, bright as black currants, narrowed. Sir Hugh Vane. The name conjured an image, tall, lantern-jawed, with the cold, amused eyes of a duelist. A man who collected enemies the way other men collect postage stamps. A man, moreover, whose country seat lay wrapped in precisely the kind of ancient scandal that delighted the little gray cells. "Describe the scene, Jap, every detail." A pause. The inspector was clearly choosing words with care. Dinner had finished. The household, wife, nephew, doctor, secretary, housekeeper, Cornun, were in the drawing room. Vane went alone to the library for his nightly brandy. He poured it himself from a decanter on the sideboard. Came back, raised the glass in a sort of mocking toast. To truth, however inconvenient. Drank, sat down by the fire. 10 minutes later, he was on the carpet, rigid as a plank, foaming at the mouth. Classic strychnine. Died at 11:31 exactly. No one left the drawing room, they swear. Yet someone got that poison into the brandy between 11:05 and 11:10 when Vane was alone for 4 minutes. 4 minutes, Poirot repeated softly. An eternity for the disciplined poisoner. And the brandy decanter, still half full. Enough strychnine in it to kill the regiment. Bien. I come at once. Tell the constable to touch nothing. Poirot replaced the receiver. For a long moment he stood motionless, fingertips pressed together, the lamplight gilding the perfect curves of his mustache. Then he clapped his hands once. A sharp, decisive sound. "George!" The valet appeared instantly, correct even in a striped nightshirt. "Pack the large valise, George. The green overcoat with the astrakhan collar, the muffler of white silk, the galoshes. It will be wet. And the small revolver, naturally. One never knows." George permitted himself the ghost of a smile. "Very good, sir. May I inquire whether we are pursuing a murderer?" "We are pursuing," said Poirot with satisfaction, "the most sympathetic of all criminals, the one who believes himself far too clever for Hercule Poirot." 23 minutes later, the Bentley 412-liter, summoned by telephone from the garage where it slumbered beneath dust sheets, stood purring at the hotel door like a great black cat. Captain Hastings, bleary-eyed, mustache askew, struggling into an ulster, appeared on the steps. "I say, Poirot, couldn't this have waited till morning?" "My friend, murder is an impatient guest. It seldom waits upon the convenience of gentlemen." Hastings subsided, grumbling, into the passenger seat. George took the wheel. The big car slid forward into darkness absolute, headlights cutting twin tunnels through swirling fog. They left the sleeping town behind and climbed onto the moor. Here the wind attacked in earnest, flinging handfuls of rain against the windscreen. Skeletal oaks loomed and vanished. Once a white owl drifted across the beam of light like a lost soul. Hastings shivered. Ghastly place for a house. They say Vane Abbey was built on the ruins of a monastery burned during the Reformation. Every baronet since 1789 has died unpleasantly. Duels, hunting accidents, one supposed suicide. Locals swear the abbey is cursed. Cursed? Poirot gave a soft chuckle. Curses, mon cher, are the invention of those who prefer not to examine bank ledgers or the human heart. What interests Poirot is not medieval superstition, but a very modern question. Who profits? The car breasted a rise. Below them, half hidden by wind-lashed trees, Vane Abbey crouched, a sprawling Gothic monstrosity of pepper-pot towers and gargoyles, windows glowing faintly amber against the night. "Looks like Dracula's country residence," muttered Hastings. "Observe, Hastings, how the house is placed. The library wing juts south, French windows opening onto a gravel terrace and lawn. On a night such as this, the gravel would preserve footprints, or betray their absence. Curious. The drive curved between ranks of skeletal yews. Iron gates stood open as though the house had been waiting. The tires crunched to a halt before a nail-studded door worthy of a fortress. It opened before they knocked. A butler, tall, cadaverous, eyes red-rimmed, inclined his head. "Monsieur Poirot?" Inspector Japp telephoned. "This way, if you please." They stepped into a vaulted hall where armor stood in shadowy rows and a log fire spat and hissed. The air smelled of old stone, beeswax, and something sharper, fear. "Sir Hugh's body remains in the library," the butler intoned. "Lady Clarissa desired that nothing be moved until the police arrived. Dr. Trevelyan is with her ladyship in the drawing room. The other members of the household are also assembled." He spoke the phrase as though the household were a gathering of vipers. Poirot paused beneath a portrait of a bewigged 18th-century Vane in scarlet coat and silver lace. The painted eyes stared down with the same cold amusement Poirot had seen in newspaper photographs of the recently dead baronet. "Tell me, Monsieur le Butler, at what precise hour did Sir Hugh drink the brandy?" 11 minutes past 11, sir. I was passing through the hall to lock up and heard Sir Hugh's voice from the drawing room, quite distinct, wishing the company good night. He was in the habit of taking a single glass of brandy in the library before retiring. "And the decanter, it was filled fresh this evening?" "Every evening, sir. Sir Hugh was particular. The 1804 Napoleon, only 3 bottles remained in the cellar." Poirot's eyebrows rose like the wings of an exotic bird. A connoisseur, then. One does not poison a brandy of that quality lightly. The sacrilege almost outweighs the murder. They passed beneath an archway hung with frayed banners. Somewhere a clock struck the quarter. The sound was lonely, metallic, final. The butler halted before double doors of dark oak. "The drawing room, sir. Shall I announce you?" "It is not necessary." Hercule Poirot announces himself. He pushed the doors wide and stepped through, Hastings at his shoulder. 5 faces turned toward the newcomer. 5 masks. Grief, defiance, fear, calculation, exhaustion. Each perfectly fitted to its wearer. Lady Clarissa Vane stood by the atom fireplace. Haute vision in black velvet and diamonds. Fair hair coiled like a coronet. 33, beautiful as winter moonlight and twice as cold. Dr. Miles Trevelyan, dark, handsome, 38, closed a silver cigarette case with a snap that sounded unnaturally loud. Miss Daphne Greer, the secretary, small and colorless as a moth, clutched a leather notebook to her breast as though it were body armor. Roderick Vane, Roddy to his friends, lounged in a tapestry chair, 26, sulky mouth, reckless eyes, a purple bruise blooming on one cheekbone. Mrs. Inglethorpe, the housekeeper, sat ramrod straight on a spindle-legged chair, hands folded, face carved from granite. In the corner, Inspector Japp rose awkwardly, relief plain on his blunt features. "Poirot, thank heaven." Poirot bowed to the room with theatrical politeness. "Mesdames, messieurs, I intrude upon your grief. But murder, alas, is an intruder who never apologizes." Lady Clarissa's voice was low, musical, dangerous. "You are Monsieur Poirot. My husband mentioned you once, described you, I believe, as a little Belgian busybody with an egg-shaped head and the self-conceit of a peacock." Poirot beamed. Sir Hugh had the eye of a connoisseur. He recognized quality when he saw it. "Madame, accept my sympathies, Mo, and my regrets that I did not arrive in time to prevent this tragedy." Roddy Vane gave a short, ugly laugh. "Prevent? The old man was asking for it. Half the county wanted him dead." "Roddy!" Lady Clarissa's tone cut like a whip. "Well, it's true. He changed his will every Michaelmas just to watch us squirm. Disinherited me last week because I crashed the Lagonda. Threatened to leave everything to a home for indigent clergy." Dr. Trevelyan spoke for the first time, voice smooth as cream. "Sir Hugh was under considerable strain. I had prescribed bromide." "Bromide," Roddy sneered. "What he needed was a muzzle." Mrs. Inglethorpe rose. "If you have finished insulting the dead, sir, I will see to the servants. They are badly shaken." Poirot's gaze fastened upon her like a pin through a butterfly. "One moment, madame. You have been housekeeper here for 47 years come Lady Day. Then you knew every secret of this house, perhaps even where Sir Hugh kept his poisons?" The woman's eyes did not flicker. "Sir Hugh kept rat poison in the gardener's shed like any sensible landowner. The key hangs on my chatelaine." She touched the heavy ring at her waist. "Nothing more lethal than arsenic for vermin. Yet tonight a man died of strychnine. Curious." Lady Clarissa moved forward, diamonds flashing like chips of ice. "Monsieur Poirot, must we endure this inquisition now? My husband's body lies scarce cold. Madame, the trail of the assassin cools faster than any corpse. 4 minutes. That is all the murderer required. 4 minutes when Sir Hugh was alone. In 4 minutes empires have fallen. A brandy glass may be doctored with ease." He turned to the room at large, voice suddenly sharp. "Who among you left the drawing room between 11:05 and 11:10? Silence. The fire settled with a hiss. Then Dr. Trevelyan shrugged. "I took a telephone call in the study. It's a patient in labor. 2 minutes, no more." Lady Clarissa said coolly, "I stepped onto the terrace for air. The room was stifling. Miss Greer whispered. I went upstairs for my handkerchief. Roddy grinned, and I went to the billiard room to find a match. Turkish cigarettes, you know. Temperamental. 4 alibis, each paper thin. Poirot's smile was seraphic. Parfait. We have opportunity in abundance. Tomorrow we shall examine means and motive. He turned toward the door, then paused as though struck by a sudden thought. One last thing. The toast Sir Hugh made. To truth, however inconvenient. Did anyone present feel that remark was directed particularly at them? No one answered. But Daphne Greer's knuckles whitened on her notebook, and somewhere in the great house a clock began to chime too. Poirot inclined his head. Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs. Sleep well, if you can. As the doors closed behind the little detective, the fire gave one last malevolent spurt, and the shadows seemed to creep closer around the 5 who remained. Outside in the corridor, Poirot's eyes gleamed like winter stars. Come, Hastings. The game, as our English friends say, is afoot, and somewhere in this mausoleum the murderer is already counting the hours until morning, and reckoning without the little gray cells of Hercule Poirot. Behind them the great door of Vane Abbey shut with the solemn finality of a tomb. The wind rose to a howl, and far across the moor a church bell tolled the half-hour. Slow, mournful, inexorable. The night was far from over. Chapter 2. The 5 Who Waited. The drawing-room at Vane Abbey was a cavern of crimson and shadow. Heavy brocade curtains shut out the night, but not the wind. It prowled behind the silk like a caged animal, making the crystal drops of the chandelier tremble and tinkle. A single standard lamp with a parchment shade cast a pool of honeyed light around the fireplace, leaving the rest of the room to brood in mahogany gloom. Portraits of dead Vanes glared down from the walls, their eyes uniformly cold, as though the painter had been paid extra to capture cruelty. Poirot entered first, moving with the neat precision of a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Hastings followed, trying not to gape like a tourist. Inspector Japp brought up the rear, clearing his throat in the manner of a man who knows he is about to be eclipsed. 5 pairs of eyes tracked the little Belgian as though he were a loaded weapon. Lady Clarissa Vane stood beneath a life-size Reynolds portrait of some ancestress in powdered hair. The resemblance was uncanny. Both women had the same pale, perfect skin and the same suggestion that they would watch you bleed without the smallest flicker of emotion. Tonight, Clarissa wore black velvet cut severely, diamonds at throat and ears flashing whenever she moved. Her hands, however, betrayed her. The knuckles were white where she gripped the mantel shelf. Dr. Miles Trevelyan leaned against the grand piano, lighting a cigarette with deliberate calm. 38, dark, almost too handsome. He had the easy confidence of a man who has never yet been refused anything he truly wanted. The flame of his lighter showed a face that was watchful rather than grief-stricken. On a petit-point sofa sat Daphne Greer, the secretary, knees pressed together, notebook clutched like a hymnal. She was 24, small, brown-haired, the sort of girl people describe as no trouble. At this moment, she looked as though she might shatter if spoken to too loudly. Roderick Vane, Roddy to everyone who feared or flattered him, sprawled in a winged armchair, long legs stretched out, a whiskey glass balanced on his knee. A bruise darkened his left cheekbone. The knuckles of his right hand were raw. He stared at Poirot with the insolent amusement of youth confronting age and finding it ridiculous. Mrs. Inglethorpe, the housekeeper, occupied a straight-backed chair near the door as though ready to rise and defend the silver. 50 years in service had planned every expression from her face except dignity. Her black bombazine dress rustled faintly when she breathed. Poirot stopped in the center of the turkey carpet and performed his small, perfect bow. Mesdames, Messieurs, permit me to express the condolences of Hercule Poirot. Death is always inconvenient, murder doubly so. Inspector Japp has explained my unfortunate habit of arriving after the crime, yet before the criminal has time to grow comfortable. I regret the intrusion. Lady Clarissa spoke first, her voice low, beautifully modulated, edged with frost. Your reputation precedes you, Monsieur Poirot. My husband used to say you were half charlatan, half genius. Sir Hugh was generous, Poirot replied blandly. I am entirely genius. A nervous titter escaped Daphne Greer and was instantly stifled. Inspector Japp coughed. Perhaps we might begin with a few... Poirot raised one delicate hand. Non, non, mon ami. First one must absorb the atmosphere. Observe how thick it is with fear, with suspicion, with secrets scarcely buried. One does not disturb a hornet's nest with a battering ram. One smokes it gently first. He turned slowly, taking in every face. Lady Clarissa, you are recently widowed, yet you stand very straight, very composed. Admirable. Dr. Trevelyan, you have closed your medical bag with a click most decisive. Inside, perhaps, the tools that failed to save your patient? Miss Greer, you clutch that notebook as though it contained the secrets of the kingdom. Monsieur Roddy, you drink whiskey as though it were medicine. One wonders what disease you treat. And Madame Inglethorpe, you sit as still as one who has already heard the last trump and found it unsurprising. Mrs. Inglethorpe inclined her head a fraction. I have served this family since I was 16, monsieur. I have seen every variety of wickedness. Tonight is merely the latest. Roddy gave a short laugh. Hear that, Clarissa? We're only the latest. Lady Clarissa's eyes flashed. Be quiet, Roddy. Poirot's gaze moved to the decanter on the marquetry sideboard. A heavy cut-glass ship's decanter, half full of amber liquid, flanked by 5 used glasses. One glass lay overturned, a faint brownish stain drying on the rim. Ah, the brandy of the late Sir Hugh, the 1804 Napoleon, I am told. A noble death for a noble vintage. He lifted the stopper, sniffed delicately, recoiled almost imperceptibly. Formidable. Enough strychnine to kill every soul in this room and still have change for the servants' hall. Trevelyan stubbed out his cigarette. I certified death at 11:31. Convulsions began approximately 11:12. Onset perfectly consistent with a massive dose taken at 11:11. Precisely 11:11? Poirot asked softly. I looked at my watch. And you, Doctor, are a man who looks at his watch often. A habit of precision. Tell me, when Sir Hugh raised his glass and toasted truth, however inconvenient, did you feel the remark was aimed at anyone in particular? Trevelyan met the detective's gaze steadily. Sir Hugh aimed remarks the way other men aim guns, randomly for the pleasure of seeing people flinch. Daphne Greer made a small, strangled sound. Poirot turned to her gently. Mademoiselle, you were Sir Hugh's confidential secretary. You typed his letters, his new wills, his threats, his reconciliations. You knew where every skeleton was buried and perhaps where fresh graves were being dug. She went scarlet, then white. I only did my job. Admirable, yet tonight you tremble. Why? Roddy leaned forward, voice lazy. Because the old devil's finally gone and taken his jokes with him. Good riddance. Lady Clarissa whirled on him. Have you no decency? Decency? Roddy's smile was ugly. He cut me off without a shilling last Thursday because I lacked moral fiber. His phrase, moral fiber. The man who ruined half the tenants on the estate and blackmailed the other half. Mrs. Inglethorpe rose with glacial calm. Master Roderick, you will not speak so of Sir Hugh in this house while his body lies unburied. Roddy opened his mouth, caught Poirot's bright, interested gaze, and closed it again. Silence fell, broken only by the wind and the ticking of a bracket clock on the mantel. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. Bon. We have hatred in abundance, we have opportunity. 4 minutes when Sir Hugh was alone, 4 minutes in which any person here could have slipped into the library, added crystals to the brandy already poured, and departed unseen. We have means. Strychnine is not difficult for those who know where to look. What we require now is motive sharpened to a cutting edge. He paused, letting the words settle. Tomorrow, when the excellent Jap has taken statements and the photographers have done their worst, Hercule Poirot will begin. I will examine the library, the decanter, the glasses, the French windows, the gravel, the lawn, the poison cupboard. I will read the new will and the old one. I will discover who benefits, who is ruined, who loved, who hated, who despaired. He looked slowly around the circle of faces. And one of you, one, will make the small mistake that betrays everything. It is inevitable. Criminals always do. Somewhere in the depths of the house, a clock began to chime midnight, each stroke falling into the room like a drop of ice water. Daphne Greer flinched as though the sound struck her flesh. Poirot smiled his small, cat-like smile. Midnight, the hour when masks begin to slip. Sleep well, mes amis. Or if sleep will not come, use the darkness to examine your consciences. They may need airing before morning. He bowed once more and turned toward the door. Hastings and Jap followed. As the doors closed, the fire gave a sudden leap, throwing the 5 shadows against the walls, distorted, monstrous, dancing. And the wind outside rose to a triumphant howl, as though the house itself were glad to have its murderer under the same roof as Hercule Poirot. Chapter 3. The Will in the Safe. 2 o'clock in the morning is the hour when even the innocent feel guilty. Vane Abbey lay wrapped in a silence so complete that every creaking board sounded like an accusation. Poirot, wrapped in a dressing gown the color of absinthe, moved through the corridors like a small green flame. Hastings, yawning cavernously, carried an electric torch whose beam jittered across suits of armor and moth-eaten tapestries. Inspector Japp brought up the rear, muttering about warrants and reasonable hours. They halted before the library door. A constable stood on duty, helmet tucked beneath his arm, looking as though he had seen a ghost and was trying to decide whether to salute it. "Everything exactly as we left it, sir," he whispered. "Not a soul's been in." "Excellent," Poirot murmured. "The scene of the crime must be respected like a jealous woman. Touch her too soon and she will never forgive." He slipped past the policeman into the room where Sir Hugh Vane had died. The library smelled of brandy, beeswax, and violent death. A chalk outline on the turkey carpet marked where the body had lain arched in its final convulsion. The great desk, solid mahogany, scarred by generations of bad temper, dominated one wall. Above the mantel, a smirking ancestor in periwig and lace seemed to watch the proceedings with malicious enjoyment. Poirot's gaze swept the room with military precision. The French windows latched but not locked, the silver tray with its tragic decanter, the overturned glass, the cigar box still open, 2 cigars removed but none smoked. He knelt, examined the carpet fibers, sniffed the air like a fastidious bloodhound, then rose and approached the safe let into the wall behind a false set of the Encyclopedia Britannica, volumes QZ. Sir Hugh's combination, Japp said, producing a slip of paper, was his own date of birth, 18th March 1874, typical vanity. "Vanity," Poirot agreed, twirling the dial with delicate fingers, "is the one sin that never disappoints the detective." The heavy door swung open with a sigh. Inside lay neat bundles of share certificates, a jewel case, a service revolver still in its oily rag, and a single blue foolscap envelope sealed with scarlet wax impressed by the Vane crest, a raven clutching a broken sword. Poirot slit the envelope with a penknife. Hastings and Japp crowded closer. The document was headed Last Will and Testament of Sir Hugh St. John Vane, Bart. Dated only the previous day, 20th October 1936, and witnessed by Dr. Miles Trevelyan and Miss Daphne Greer. Poirot read aloud in a voice that grew softer with every clause. To my wife, Clarissa Mary Vane, my pearl necklace and the contents of her personal jewel box, but no further provision. To my nephew, Roderick Hugh St. John Vane, £500 and my hunting crop with which he may learn discipline. To Mrs. Inglethorpe, an annuity of £200 in gratitude for 47 years of service. To my secretary, Miss Daphne Greer, £1,000 in any typewriter she fancies. All the residue of my estate, real and personal, estimated at £314,000 gross. I bequeath absolutely to the Vane Foundation for Medical Research, to be administered by my trusted friend and physician, Dr. Miles Trevelyan. Hastings let out a low whistle. Good Lord, he cut Clarissa out entirely. Japp scratched his head. And made the doctor the fattest trustee in Devon. That's a motive you could hang a hat on. Poirot's eyes glittered. Or the perfect way to remove a wife from the list of suspects. Observe, Lady Clarissa now has no financial motive whatever. She is either the most innocent woman in England, or the most brilliantly shielded. He turned the will over. On the back, in Sir Hugh's spidery hand, someone had scrawled in fresh ink. Tell Clarissa the pearls are paste. The real ones were sold to pay Roddy's gambling debts. She will enjoy the joke. Mon Dieu, Poirot breathed. Even from the grave, Sir Hugh cannot resist tormenting his victims. A sudden noise made them spin round. The library door had opened soundlessly. Lady Clarissa stood on the threshold in a dressing gown of ivory silk, hair loose about her shoulders like a pale waterfall. In the half-light she looked impossibly young and deadly. I heard voices, she said. Her tone was conversational, almost amused. Find anything interesting in my husband's little iron box, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot bowed. Only the future, madame. Yours appears uncertain. She crossed the room with the grace of a panther and glanced at the document in Poirot's hand. For a moment her composure slipped. The blood drained from her face, leaving it the color of candle wax. Nothing, she whispered. After 12 years, nothing but paste pearls and a joke. She laughed then, a small brittle sound like ice cracking, and the men flinched as though struck. Congratulations, doctor, she called toward the corridor, though Trevelyan was nowhere in sight. You always said Hugh would leave everything to science. How gratified you must be. Her gaze returned to Poirot. Does this make me a suspect again, monsieur? Or less of one? I confess I no longer know the rules of the game. The rules, madame, Poirot said gently, are changing even as we speak. Lady Clarissa swept out as silently as she had come. The door closed behind her with the finality of a coffin lid. Japp exhaled. Blimey, there's a woman who could poison a man's brandy and serve it with a smile. Or, Poirot corrected, a woman who has just discovered that murder would have profited her nothing. Psychology, mes amis, is everything. He slipped the will into his pocket. Come. Dawn is not far off, and there are carbon copies to be hunted. Secretaries, I find, are sometimes less discreet than they imagine. As they left the library, the chalk outline on the carpet seemed to grin up at them. A rictus that had the last laugh after all. Behind them, the safe door swung shut with a soft, expensive click like a banker locking away a fortune no one in that house would ever touch. Chapter 4. The Anonymous Letters. Dawn crept over Vane Abbey like a guilty thing, pale and reluctant. A low mist clung to the lawns, every blade of grass glittered with frost that had not been there when Sir Hugh drank his last brandy. Poirot stood at the secretary's office window watching the light grow, hands clasped behind his back, mustaches bristling with concentration. He had not slept. Murderers, he often remarked, are granted no such luxury, and it was only courteous to keep them company. The office was a small, chilly room on the ground floor, smelling of ink, violet ribbon, and terror. A Remington No. 7 typewriter sat on a gate-legged table like a squat black toad. Beside it lay a wire basket overflowing with burnt fragments, half-charred paper that had been hastily consigned to the grate only hours earlier. Poirot had arrived before the maid came to lay the fire. With tweezers and infinite patience, he had rescued the fragments and spread them on the blotter. Hastings, wrapped in a traveling rug, watched in bleary admiration. Anonymous letters, Poirot? Dash it all, that's a bit low even for this crew. Low, yes, also illuminating. Observe. He arranged the scraps like a jigsaw. Though scorched, phrases leapt out in vicious capitals. Your wife and the doctor laugh at you behind your back. Ask Mrs. Inglethorpe why the poison cabinet is never locked. Your nephew will have you certified insane before Christmas. The pearls are paste and the joke is on her. All typed on the same machine that now sat before them. The E was slightly out of alignment. The T carried a tiny nick on the left arm. Unmistakable. The door opened. Daphne Greer entered carrying a tray of coffee, saw what lay on the desk, and the tray rattled violently. Mademoiselle, Poirot greeted her with grave courtesy. You are up early? Conscience, perhaps? She set the tray down with shaking hands. I always start at 7. Sir Hugh liked his post by 9. Yet Sir Hugh will read no more post. Sit down, mademoiselle, we must talk of these little billets due you tried so hard to destroy. Daphne collapsed into the typing chair as though her legs had been cut away. Tears welled, trembled, fell. I didn't kill him, she whispered. I hated him, yes, he was cruel, he mocked me, paid me 12 shillings a week, made me read his threats aloud so he could enjoy the wording, but I never wished him dead. Only gone. Poirot pushed a fragment toward her. You typed these? She nodded miserably. 3, no 4. I thought if he believed people were plotting against him, he might soften, become afraid, leave me alone. It was stupid. Stupid but human, and the violet notepaper, the perfume Nuit Persane. That wasn't me. I used plain Basildon Bond and no scent. Someone must have taken a sheet from Lady Clarissa's drawer. Everyone knows she uses that stationery. Everyone, Poirot repeated softly. How convenient. He opened a drawer and produced a thin bundle tied with pale blue ribbon. More letters unburnt that Daphne had not dared destroy. Poirot read one aloud. If you confront your wife tonight, she will deny everything. Watch the doctor's face when you mention the word Venice. Venice? Poirot mused. A city of masks and assignations. Tell me, mademoiselle, when did Sir Hugh last visit Venice? Never with Lady Clarissa, but Dr. Trevelyan went last March. For a medical congress, he said. Sir Hugh laughed about it for weeks. Said congresses were excellent places for certain specialties. Hastings colored. Poirot merely raised an eyebrow like a drawn sword. Footsteps sounded in the corridor, heavy, impatient. Dr. Trevelyan appeared in the doorway, overcoat flecked with moorland mist, medical bag in hand. I've been to old Mag's at Widdicombe. Ruptured appendix, thought I'd save the ambulance a journey. His gaze flicked to the scorched fragments. What the devil is this? Evidence, doctor, Poirot replied. Of a campaign to drive Sir Hugh Vane to paranoia, or to suicide. A campaign that miscalculated most spectacularly. Trevelyan's handsome face hardened. Anonymous letters? Hugh showed me 1 or 2. I told him to burn them and ignore the writer. Obviously good advice. Obviously, Poirot echoed. Yet someone continued to write. Someone who knew precisely which nerves to touch. Someone, perhaps, who stood to gain if Sir Hugh's suspicions destroyed his marriage or his life. The doctor's eyes narrowed. Be careful, Monsieur Poirot. Accusations are easy, proof is another matter. He turned on his heel and left. The door slammed with the crisp finality of a gunshot. Daphne Greer was crying quietly. Poirot patted her shoulder with surprising gentleness. Courage, mademoiselle. Tears wash nothing clean, but truth sometimes does. Later in the breakfast room, Poirot watched the household assemble like pieces on a chessboard. Lady Clarissa, white-faced, toyed with coffee she did not drink. Roddy nursed a hangover and a scowl. Mrs. Inglethorpe poured tea with the solemnity of a priestess at an altar. Trevelyan read the Times as though it might bite him. Poirot entered carrying a small cardboard box. He set it in the center of the table. The inquest, mes amis, will open at 11. The verdict is a foregone conclusion. Murder by person or persons unknown. Before then, a small demonstration. He opened the box and produced a single sheet of violet notepaper and a burnt matchstick. This paper came from Lady Clarissa's private drawer. The match was used to light the fire that destroyed the letters. Observe the watermark. Imperial Vellum 1935. The stationer in Exeter sold only 2 quires last year. One to Lady Clarissa, the other to... He paused theatrically. Dr. Miles Trevelyan. For his private correspondence, he told the shopman. Every head turned toward the doctor. Trevelyan laid down his newspaper with exaggerated care. I frequently write prescriptions on colored paper. Patients remember them better. Admirable, Poirot said. Yet this sheet bears the faint impression of a typewriter's E with the telltale misalignment. The same misalignment, doctor, as the letters that drove Sir Hugh to the edge of madness. Trevelyan smiled thinly. Coincidence. Coincidence, Poirot repeated, tasting the word, is a luxury no murderer can afford. Outside, the church bell began to toll for the inquest, slow, measured strokes that rolled across the frost like a warning. Poirot gathered the violet sheet and slipped it into his pocket. Come, Hastings. The game grows interesting. Someone in this house has been playing with fire. Soon we shall see whose fingers are burnt. As they left the room, the frost on the window panes began to melt in thin, trembling tears, exactly as though the Abbey itself had begun to weep for what was coming. Chapter 5. The Locked Poison Cabinet. The gardeners. She'd stood at the far end of the walled kitchen garden, half swallowed by ivy and remorse. It was a place of damp earth, rust and secrets, the sort of building that children dare one another to enter after dark. At 9:30 on a raw November morning with the frost still thick on the ground, Hercule Poirot looked almost comically out of place among the rakes and flower pots. His green ulster was buttoned to the throat, his galoshes gleamed like patent leather, and he carried a small magnifying lens as though it were a field marshal's baton. Inspector Japp, red-nosed and impatient, stamped his feet. Hastings hovered behind, trying not to sneeze at the dust. Mrs. Inglethorpe produced an iron ring heavy with keys. She selected one with the resigned air of a priestess unlocking Pandora's box. The poison cabinet, monsieur. Sir Hugh insisted it be kept here, away from the house. Said servants were light-fingered and children curious. She inserted the key. The Yale lock turned with a click that sounded unnaturally loud in the morning stillness. The cupboard door swung open. 3 shelves confronted them. Top shelf, tins of sheep dip and slug pellets. Middle shelf, a blue bottle labeled arsenic, rat poison in faded Gothic lettering. Bottom shelf, a squat brown bottle, cork sealed with red wax bearing a skull and crossbones and the words, Strychnine hydrochloride, 1 ounce. The bottle was half empty. Poirot lifted it as reverently as a chalice. He removed the cork, sniffed, nodded once. Exactly as expected. Enough remains to kill a dozen men, yet enough is missing to have killed Sir Hugh 5 times over. He examined the lock with his lens. No scratches, no signs of forcing. Whoever took the poison possessed a key or the skill of a master cracksman. Mrs. Inglethorpe's lips thinned. Only 2 keys exist. Sir Hugh wore one on his watch chain. The duplicate hangs on my chatelaine and has never left my person. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Never, madame? Not even when you laid it on your dressing table at night? Or when you bathed? Keys have been known to wander for minutes at a time. The housekeeper met his gaze without flinching. I sleep with it beneath my pillow, monsieur. 47 years in this house have taught me caution. Admirable, Poirot murmured. Yet caution is not always proof against cunning. He turned to the gardener, a grizzled ancient named Pascoe, who had been hovering in the doorway chewing a straw. Pascoe, when was this cupboard last opened? 3 weeks ago, come Thursday, sir. Sir Hugh wanted rat bait for the stables. I unlocked it myself under his eye. Bottle was full then, near as I remember. 3 weeks, Poirot repeated softly. Plenty of time for a careful thief to take a wax impression and return a duplicate key before it was missed. He closed the cupboard, pocketed the strychnine bottle, and led the way back to the house. By 11 o'clock, the entire household had been assembled in the long gallery. A cavernous room lined with ancestral portraits whose eyes seemed to follow every movement. A table had been set in the center with the fatal decanter, the 5 brandy glasses, and a stopwatch. Poirot addressed them like a conjurer about to perform his favorite illusion. Mesdames et messieurs, we shall now reconstruct the 4 fatal minutes. At 11:05 precisely, Sir Hugh left the drawing room saying he would fetch his own brandy. He entered the library alone. At 11:09 he returned, glass in hand, made his mocking toast and drank. Convulsions began at 11:12. Therefore, the poison was added between 11:05 and 11:09, 4 minutes. He placed the stopwatch on the table and pressed the button. Observe. 4 minutes is a very long time when one is counting. He began to pace, speaking as he moved. Sir Hugh closes the drawing-room door behind him. He crosses the hall, 10 seconds. He enters the library, another 10. He pours brandy, slowly because he is a connoisseur, 20 seconds. He stands, glass in hand, perhaps admiring the color in the lamplight. Now the murderer must act. Poirot stopped beside the French windows. Entry could have been made here. The gravel path would show footprints, but last night there was no frost until midnight. A careful person could cross the lawn, enter, add the crystals, strychnine dissolves almost instantly in brandy, and retreat the same way. Total time required, 90 seconds. He turned to face them. But who left the drawing room during those 4 minutes? Silence. Then one by one the alibis were repeated, thin, brittle, rehearsed. Dr. Trevelyan. I took a telephone call in the study, a patient. Lady Clarissa. I stepped onto the terrace for air. Daphne Greer. I went upstairs for aspirin. I have headaches. Roddy Vane. I was in the billiard room looking for a box of matches. Mrs. Inglethorpe with icy dignity. I remained by the fire with Miss Greer until she left for her aspirin. 4 people absent, 1 witness whose testimony conveniently collapsed the moment it was examined. Poirot produced a small glass ampoule from his waistcoat pocket and held it to the light. Inside, a few white crystals glittered like malevolent snow. This was found beneath the library sofa this morning. Military-issue strychnine tablets, 1 10-grain each. Standard equipment in certain medical kits during the war. Very difficult to obtain in 1936 unless one is a doctor who keeps souvenirs. Trevelyan's face remained impassive. Many doctors kept such things. True, but only one doctor in this house served with the 17th Field Ambulance in 1918. Only one doctor possesses a key to the poison cabinet that might have been duplicated. Only one doctor benefits from the new will to the tune of £300,000. The gallery was so quiet they could hear the grandfather clock in the hall gathering itself to strike 12. Poirot smiled his small, terrible smile. We advance, mes amis. The net tightens. Soon the little fish will feel the mesh against their gills. He bowed and turned away. As he did so, the clock struck. Noon, brazen and indifferent. The sound rolled through the house like a funeral bell, and somewhere in the distance a woman began to weep, softly, hopelessly, as though she already knew whose neck the rope was measured for. Chapter 6. The alibi of Ice Night again, and Vane Abbey felt smaller as though the walls had crept inward while no one was looking. Frost silvered the windows. Every breath hung in the air like a guilty secret. In the library, the fire had been allowed to die to a sullen red, so that the chalk outline on the carpet looked freshly drawn in blood. Poirot had ordered the room cleared of policemen. Only he, Hastings, and Inspector Japp remained. A single lamp burned on the desk, throwing long shadows that danced whenever the wind rattled the French windows. Poirot stood at the exact spot where Sir Hugh had poured his brandy 48 hours earlier. In his hand, he held an untouched glass of apple juice the color of the fatal Napoleon. "Regardez," he said softly. "We reconstruct, not for theater, but for truth." He raised the glass in mocking salute. "To truth, however inconvenient." Then he drank. Hastings shivered. "I say, old chap, that's a bit ghoulish." "Necessary, mon ami. The murderer must feel the moment again." Poirot set the glass down and began to move with silent precision. 11:05. Sir Hugh closes the drawing-room door. He crossed to the hall door, opened and shut it softly. 11:06. He pours. Poirot lifted the decanter, tilted it, let an imaginary stream fall. 11:07. He stands, savors the bouquet. Now the murderer has perhaps 90 seconds. He glided to the French windows, unlatched them, stepped out onto the terrace. The night air struck like a blade. "Observe," he called back. "Tonight there is thick frost. Footprints would remain until morning." On the night of the murder, frost did not begin until 11:50 according to the meteorological station at Princetown. Therefore the murderer crossed the lawn, not the gravel. He returned inside, closingly brushing frost from his sleeves. Grass holds dew. Dew holds traces of Macassar oil, brilliantine, or, most interesting, Dr. Trevelyan's expensive bergamot pomade. Japp grunted. "We searched the lawn at dawn. Nothing. Because you searched after the sun had risen and the dew had vanished. Tomorrow we search again at first light with magnifying glasses." Poirot closed the windows and turned the key with a click. Now the alibis of ice, each one colder than the last. He produced a notebook and read aloud. "Lady Clarissa, I stepped onto the terrace for air. Yet the gravel was soft from earlier rain. No heel prints. She never left the house." Hastings gaped. "You mean she lied?" "I mean the terrace door was watched by Mrs. Inglethorpe, who saw no one. Curious. Dr. Trevelyan. Telephone call in the study. The village exchange has no record of any call to Vane Abbey between 10 and midnight. The study telephone is on a party line shared with the vicarage. The vicar's maid was listening for a message about her mother. She heard nothing." Japp whistled. "So Trevelyan never received a call." "Or," Poirot said softly, "he made one, to an empty study to give himself 4 minutes alone. Roddy Vane. Went to the billiard room for matches. Yet the box of Swan Vestas was on the drawing-room mantel all evening. and the billiard table shows no trace of cigarette ash. Roddy is a chain smoker. He would have left a snowstorm. He paused. Only 2 people never left the drawing room. Mrs. Inglethorpe, and for part of the time, Miss Daphne Greer. Yet even Miss Greer absented herself for aspirin. Hastings rubbed his temples. Dash it, Poirot, they can't all be lying. They are not lying. They are acting in concert, each protecting or accusing another. A symphony of deception. Poirot reached into his pocket and drew out the small glass ampule again. This military strychnine. I telephoned the War Office this afternoon. Every ampule was accounted for except those issued to the 17th Field Ambulance 1918. One officer never returned his kit, Captain Miles Trevelyan, MC. Jap's eyes narrowed. That's damning. It is suggestive, but suggestion is not proof. At that moment, the electric lights flickered and died. The room plunged into crimson gloom lit only by the dying fire. Hastings started. What the devil? A scream, high, animal, terrified, ripped through the corridor. They ran. In the upper hall, they found Daphne Greer outside Lady Clarissa's bedroom door, face bone white, pointing with a trembling finger. Another anonymous letter lay on the carpet, pushed beneath the door. Poirot snatched it up. The violet paper, the Remington typing, the faint trace of nuit persane. It contained only 7 words. Tonight, the second death. Sleep well, my lady. Lady Clarissa appeared behind the girl, dressing gown clutched at her throat, eyes huge. Someone wants me terrified, she whispered. Or dead. Poirot's voice cut through the panic like a scalpel. No one will die tonight. Inspector Japp will place a man outside every bedroom door. The house is sealed. The murderer has played his last card too early. He turned the letter over. On the back, almost invisible, someone had scrawled in pencil. Ask the doctor why he burned his garden shoes this morning. Poirot's eyes glittered like winter stars. Ah, now that is careless, very careless indeed. He looked up at the circle of frightened faces. The ice cracks, mes amis. One more frost, and it will bear no one's weight. Somewhere in the house, a clock began to chime 2. The sound floated down the corridors like a death knell. Poirot folded the letter with delicate precision and slipped it into his pocket. Tomorrow, he said quietly, we shall see whose footprints remain on the lawn, and whose conscience cannot bear the light of day. He turned away. Behind him, the fire in the library gave one last sullen flare, then sank into darkness. And for the first time since Hercule Poirot had entered Vane Abbey, the wind outside fell silent, as though the house itself were holding its breath for what was coming. Chapter 7. The second death that never came. The night passed in brittle silence. No second corpse, no scream, no crash of a window in the dark. Only the slow, relentless ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, and the knowledge that every bedroom door now had a plainclothes constable leaning against it, yawning and cold and very much awake. At 7:30, the household gathered in the breakfast room like survivors of a shipwreck. No one had slept properly. Eyes were red-rimmed, hands unsteady on the coffee cups. The silver teapot trembled in Mrs. Inglethorpe's grasp. Even her iron composure had hairline cracks. Poirot entered last, immaculate, in a charcoal suit and a tie the color of gunmetal. He carried a small tray covered by a linen napkin. The room fell silent as though someone had turned off a wireless. Bon matin, he said pleasantly. No one died? I am desolate to disappoint the dramatist among us, but the second death was never intended to take place. It was a feint, a flourish, the matador's cape to draw the bull. And the bull charged, most revealingly. He placed the tray in the center of the table and whipped away the napkin. Poirot lifted the feather between thumb and forefinger. This, mesdames et messieurs, is the insignia of the 17th Field Ambulance 1918, a white albatross feather worn in the cap by medical officers who served at Passchendaele. Very few remain. One was found this morning inside Dr. Trevelyan's crocodile skin medical bag, caught in the lining. Trevelyan, standing by the window, gave a short, contemptuous laugh. Sentimental rubbish. I kept it as a souvenir. Thousands of men served in the war, Poirot. Thousands, yes. But only one man in this room received the military cross for rescuing wounded under fire while carrying a white feather in his helmet for identification. Only one man had access to those exact ampules. Only one man burned a pair of perfectly good gardening shoes in the boiler yesterday morning, shoes that had walked across wet grass 2 nights ago. Trevelyan's smile thinned. You are building a palace on sand. Sand? Poirot echoed. No, Doctor. On frost. He turned to the others. Last night's letter was slipped beneath Lady Clarissa's door at 1:43 precisely. The constable outside heard nothing, saw nothing. The corridor is uncarpeted oak, every footstep echoes. Therefore the letter was placed there earlier and pushed under at the exact moment by someone already inside the room. Lady Clarissa's hand flew to her throat. Inside? But I locked my door. From the inside, yes. By someone who never left. Someone you trusted enough to admit after midnight, madam. Someone who comforted you while pretending to discover the letter with you. All eyes turned to Daphne Greer, who had gone the color of candle wax. I only went to see if her ladyship was all right, she stammered. She was distressed. I stayed 10 minutes, no more. 10 minutes, Poirot repeated gently, is sufficient for many things. He produced the violet letter from his pocket. This paper was torn from a packet purchased by Dr. Trevelyan in Exeter last March. The faint scent is Nuit Personne, Lady Clarissa's perfume, yes, but also used by the doctor on his handkerchiefs. A clever touch. To borrow the lady's scent and let suspicion fall upon her. Lady Clarissa rose slowly like a woman in a trance. Miles, she said very quietly, tell me he's lying. Trevelyan met her gaze for a long moment, then shrugged with theatrical weariness. He has a vivid imagination, my dear, nothing more. Poirot's voice suddenly cracked like a whip. Imagination? Then let us test it with fact. He clapped his hands. Jap entered, followed by 2 constables in the gardener Pasco, who carried a pair of mud-caked shoes wrapped in newspaper. These, Poirot announced, were retrieved from the boiler furnace before they were completely burned. Size 10, handmade by Lobb of St. James's, Dr. Trevelyan's size and maker. The right sole carries a patch of Devon red clay found only on the lower lawn, and embedded in the left heel, fragments of grass that still hold droplets of bergamot pomade. The dew on the lawn 2 nights ago has betrayed you, Doctor. Trevelyan's face did not change, but something behind the eyes died. Lady Clarissa took 1 step toward him, then another until she stood close enough to touch. You used me, she whispered. You let me think. You let me hope. Trevelyan's mask slipped entirely. For the first time, they saw the raw, possessive hunger beneath the charm. I did it for us, Clarissa. He was destroying you. Another year and there would have been nothing left but the shell. I gave you freedom. You gave me a cage with the door painted open, she said, and turned away as though he had ceased to exist. Poirot's voice was almost sorrowful. You planned for months. The letters to isolate Sir Hugh, to make him suspicious of everyone except his trusted physician. The new will, forged with his signature when he was drunk or drugged. Your medical knowledge made that simple. The poison taken weeks in advance. The 4 minutes bought with false alibis and false fears. Brilliant, Doctor. Almost perfect. He paused. Almost, Because you forgot that Hercule Poirot notices when a man burns perfectly good shoes, and when a white feather appears where it has no business to be. Trevelyan looked round the room, at Roddy's contempt, Daphne's terror, Mrs. Inglethorpe's stone-carved grief, Clarissa's icy emptiness, and for the first time he seemed small. Japp stepped forward with the handcuffs. "Miles Edward Trevelyan, I am arresting you for the willful murder of Sir Hugh St. John Vane." The rest was ritual. Trevelyan did not resist. As the steel clicked shut, he looked once more at Lady Clarissa. "It was worth it," he said softly. "Every second." She did not answer. She was staring at the white feather on the table as though it were the only real thing left in the world. Outside, the frost began to melt under a weak November sun. Inside the breakfast room, the clock struck 9, then with a small, apologetic cough, stopped forever. The second death had not come. The first had finally claimed its murderer. Chapter 8. The Reconstruction. The library had been prepared like a stage. Heavy curtains were drawn against the late afternoon dusk. Only 2 lamps burned, one on the desk, one beside the fatal decanter. The chalk outline had been erased, the carpet brushed, yet the room still felt haunted. The air tasted of brandy, candle wax, and impending judgment. At 10 minutes to 5, Poirot entered alone. He wore evening dress, black tie, white waistcoat, the Order of St. Stanislas in his lapel, as though he were about to conduct an orchestra rather than expose a murderer. Behind him, the household filed in, summoned by formal notes delivered an hour earlier. They took their places without a word. Lady Clarissa pale as porcelain, Roddy sullen, Daphne Greer clutching a handkerchief, Mrs. Inglethorpe rigid with disapproval. Dr. Trevelyan standing a little apart, hands in the pockets of his dinner jacket, a faint, defiant smile on his lips. Inspector Japp and 2 constables waited in the shadows by the door. Poirot bowed with theatrical gravity. "Mesdames et messieurs, we are assembled for the final act. The curtain rises on the truth." He moved to the sideboard where the decanter, refilled with harmless brandy for the occasion, stood exactly as it had on the night of the murder. Regardez. At 11:05, Sir Hugh left the drawing room. We know this because the butler heard him wish the company good night. He entered this room alone, poured his brandy, and stood here. Poirot took the position, savoring the bouquet of the 1804 Napoleon. 4 minutes of solitude. 4 minutes of opportunity. He lifted the decanter, poured an inch of amber liquid into a glass, and raised it in ironic salute. To truth, however inconvenient. Then swiftly he set the glass down untouched. During those 4 minutes, the murderer entered through the French window. Poirot crossed to the windows and flung them open. The night was mild, no frost yet. Footprints on gravel would have shown. Therefore the assassin crossed the lawn. Grass is forgiving. Dew is not. He stepped outside for a moment, returned and closed the windows. 90 seconds to enter, add the strychnine crystals. They dissolve instantly and retreat. Another 30 seconds to walk calmly back to the drawing room. Total absence, less than 2 minutes. Child's play for a disciplined mind. Poirot turned to face them. 4 people left the drawing room during the critical period. 4 alibis, each more fragile than Venetian glass. He pointed to Lady Clarissa. Madame says she stepped onto the terrace. Yet the gravel was soft, no prints. She never left the house. To Roddy. Monsieur Roddy sought matches in the billiard room, yet the matchbox never left the drawing room mantel. He was seen by the footman returning from the direction of the gun room, empty-handed. To Daphne Greer. Mademoiselle went upstairs for aspirin, yet the aspirin bottle in her room was full and the maid on the upper landing saw no one pass. Finally to Trevelyan. Docteur, you received a telephone call that never came. The exchange recorded nothing. The study telephone was silent all evening. Trevelyan shrugged. Coincidences. Coincidences, Poirot repeated, tasting the word like spoiled wine. Then let us have no more of them. He produced a small object from his pocket, a lump of wax the size of a walnut, pale yellow, bearing the clear impression of the poison cabinet key. This was found this morning hidden behind the lining of your medical bag, Doctor. Your fingerprint is in the wax, perfect, unmistakable. 3 weeks ago you asked Mrs. Inglethorpe for aspirin for a headache. You were left alone in the housekeeper's room for 90 seconds. 90 seconds was all you needed. Trevelyan's smile did not waver, but the pulse beat visibly in his temple. Poirot continued, voice soft, inexorable. You wrote the anonymous letters on Lady Clarissa's violet paper, scented with her perfume, to direct suspicion toward her and away from yourself. You forged the new will. Sir Hugh was heavily drugged with veronal the night before he died. You prescribed it. You took the strychnine weeks in advance, substituting harmless tablets in the ampule so that no one would notice the loss. You burned your shoes yesterday because the lawn dew still carried traces of your bergamot pomade. You even staged the second death letter to create panic and confusion. He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was unbearable. One error alone you made, Doctor. You believed that because you had thought of everything, no one else could think at all. You forgot the little gray cells. Trevelyan's composure cracked like thin ice. You have no proof the will is forged, he snapped. Poirot produced a second document, the original will dated a month earlier, leaving everything to Lady Clarissa. Sir Hugh's banker in Exeter confirmed this morning that Sir Hugh visited him only yesterday to revoke the new will and reinstate the old. He intended to tell Lady Clarissa tonight, after one final cruel joke about the paste pearls. You learned of the appointment, panicked, and acted 24 hours too early. Lady Clarissa made a small, wounded sound. Trevelyan took one step toward the door. Japp's men moved to block him. It was perfect, Trevelyan said, almost to himself. Perfect. No, Poirot replied gently. It was premeditated, and premeditation, Doctor, always leaves footprints, even when it walks across grass. He turned to the French windows and flung them open again. The last of the daylight showed the lawn beyond, still silvered with frost. Look, even now the grass remembers. Trevelyan stared for a long moment at the darkening garden. Then his shoulders sagged. The last of the actor fell away, leaving only a tired, defeated man. Take me away, Inspector, he said quietly. I find the company oppressive. As the handcuffs clicked shut, Lady Clarissa spoke for the first time, her voice clear and cold as winter air. You murdered him for money you will never touch, Miles. And you murdered whatever was left between us. I hope the memory keeps you warm in Dartmoor. Trevelyan did not look at her again. The library door closed behind the little procession. The room seemed suddenly larger, cleaner, as though a poison had been drawn from its veins. Poirot stood alone in the lamplight, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the decanter that had nearly brought down a house. Outside, the wind had dropped entirely. The frost began to glitter under the first stars. The reconstruction was complete. Chapter 9. The Last Piece. The drawing-room fire had been built high for the first time in days, as though the house itself wished to burn away the taste of treachery. Outside, a thin November rain ticked against the windows. Inside, the silence was heavier than any storm. They sat in the same places they had occupied on the night of the murder, yet everything was different. Lady Clarissa, in deep mourning black that made her skin almost translucent, occupied the high-backed chair by the mantel. Roddy sprawled opposite, a tumbler of whiskey untouched in his hand. Daphne Greer had been given a glass of brandy by Mrs. Inglethorpe and kept staring at it as though it might bite her. The housekeeper herself stood behind her mistress's chair like a dark, immovable sentinel. Poirot entered last, followed by Hastings and Inspector Japp. The little Belgian carried nothing, no notebook, no dramatic bundle of evidence, only the quiet certainty of a man who has finished a long and difficult equation. He did not sit. He remained standing in the center of the carpet, hands clasped, the firelight glinting on the perfect curves of his mustaches. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, voice soft yet carrying to every corner. "The play is over. The curtain has fallen. There remains only the epilogue, to place the last piece in the mosaic so that even the most reluctant eye must see the complete picture." He turned first to Lady Clarissa. "Madam, you are innocent of your husband's death. You believed until 2 nights ago that you were the principal beneficiary of the earlier will. You had no idea that Dr. Trevelyan had forged a new one. Your only crime, if crime it be, was to love a man who mistook possession for affection." Lady Clarissa inclined her head, a single tear sliding down the perfect curve of her cheek. She did not wipe it away. Poirot faced Roddy. "Monsieur Roddy, your sins are many. Gambling, drunkenness, cruelty to horses. But murder is not among them. The blood on your cuff the morning after the crime came from a poacher's snare on the North Moor. You were out that night, yes, but shooting rabbits, not relatives." Roddy gave a shaky laugh that held no humor. "Thanks awfully, old man," to Daphne Greer. "Mademoiselle, you wrote some of the anonymous letters, 4 to be precise, in a desperate attempt to frighten Sir Hugh into kinder treatment. You burned the others in panic. You are guilty of malice, not murder. Your conscience may punish you, the law will not." Daphne began to sob quietly into her handkerchief. Finally, Poirot looked at Mrs. Inglethorpe. "Madame, you have served this family for 47 years with absolute loyalty. You suspected the doctor weeks ago. You noticed the missing strychnine. You saw him take the wax impression. Yet you said nothing because you believed Lady Clarissa loved him and you would not break her heart a second time. Silence can be noble, but it can also be dangerous." Mrs. Inglethorpe's eyes filled, but she did not speak. Poirot's gaze swept the room once more. "And so we come to Dr. Miles Edward Trevelyan. He is at this moment in the cells at Princetown, writing a confession that will save the Crown the cost of a lengthy trial. He has admitted everything: the forged will, the letters, the poison taken 6 weeks ago, the false alibis, even the pathetic little drama of the second death letter designed to create confusion." Hastings could not contain himself. "But why, Poirot? The man had everything. Looks, a good practice, Clarissa's love." "Love?" Poirot's voice cut like a scalpel. "No, mon ami. Obsession. Trevelyan did not want Clarissa. He wanted to own her completely. Sir Hugh's cruelty, his constant threats to change the will, his mockery of the affair. He knew, of course, he always knew. These were intolerable to a man who could not bear to share even a glance. When Sir Hugh visited his banker on the morning of the murder to reinstate the old will in Clarissa's favor, Trevelyan learned of it from the banker's clerk, a patient of his. That afternoon he acted. 24 hours, too soon as it turned out, but murder is rarely patient. Lady Clarissa spoke for the first time, her voice steady now. "He told me once that he would kill anyone who tried to take me from him. I thought it was romance. It was a warning." Poirot inclined his head. "Precisely, madame. Pathological love is only a heartbeat away from pathological hate." He reached into his waistcoat pocket and drew out the tiny lump of wax that held Trevelyan's fingerprint. "This is the last piece. Scotland Yard's experts confirmed the print this afternoon. It matches perfectly. The case is closed. Silence settled, deeper than before. Then Roddy raised his glass at last. "To absent friends," he said bitterly and drank. Lady Clarissa stood. She was pale but composed, the Ice Queen once more. "Monsieur Poirot, the estate will go to medical research after all," Sir Hugh's final joke. "I shall sell the pearls, paste or real, it no longer matters, and disappear. Somewhere there is a village where no one has ever heard the name Vane." She extended a gloved hand. Poirot bowed over it with grave respect. "Madam, you leave behind a house of shadows. Take with you the certainty that justice has been done." Mrs. Inglethorpe stepped forward. "And I, monsieur, shall remain. Someone must keep the roofs on until the trustees decide what is to become of the abbey." She hesitated, then added in a voice so low only Poirot heard, "Thank you for giving her ladyship back her soul." The fire settled with a soft sigh. Outside, the rain eased to a gentle whisper, as though the moor itself were exhaling. Poirot turned toward the door. "Come, Hastings. Our work here is finished. Another drama concluded, another order restored." As they crossed the hall, the great clock that had stopped at 9 that morning gave a sudden creak and began to tick again. Slow, measured, indifferent. Behind them, the drawing-room door closed for the last time on the 5 who remained. The last piece was in place. Chapter 10. Order restored. 3 days later, the moor lay under a hard, glittering frost. Vane Abbey looked almost beautiful in the thin winter light. Gargoyles rhymed with ice, windows flashing like cold fire. The raven on the gatehouse crest holding its broken sword against a sky the color of steel. Inside, the house felt hollowed out, as though the poison that had killed Sir Hugh had finally seeped into the very stones and left nothing alive behind. Poirot and Hastings stood in the great hall while George supervised the loading of the Bentley. The trunks were closed, the dust sheets back over the furniture, the servants paid and dismissed until the trustees should decide the Abbey's fate. Only Mrs. Inglethorpe remained, a black figure at the foot of the staircase, keys jangling softly at her waist like a funeral bell. Lady Clarissa descended slowly, dressed for travel in a coat of dark sable and a small hat with a veil. She carried no luggage except a single Morocco dressing case and the expression of someone who has already left. She paused on the last step and looked round the hall as though memorizing it for a nightmare. "I have signed everything the lawyers required," she said. Her voice was low, perfectly steady. "The pearls, paste as it turns out, will be sold for the servants' pensions. The rest goes to Dr. Trevelyan's Precious Research Foundation." Hugh's last laugh, after all. Poirot bowed. "And you, madam?" "I shall vanish. There is a boat from Southampton on Saturday. After that, the name Clarissa Vane will cease to exist. I have become rather good at ceasing to exist." She offered her hand. Poirot took it gently. The fingers were ice cold. "You gave me justice, Monsieur Poirot. It is a colder gift than mercy, but I accept it. Madame, justice is the only gift that never tarnishes." She smiled then, the first real smile anyone had seen on her face in years, and for a moment she was almost beautiful again. Mrs. Inglethorpe stepped forward, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Goodbye, my lady. The house will wait for you if you ever—" "It will wait a long time," Clarissa finished softly. She touched the housekeeper's cheek once lightly, then turned and walked out into the white morning without looking back. The Bentley's door closed, the engine purred, gravel crunched, and Lady Clarissa Vane was gone. Poirot watched the car disappear between the yew trees, then turned to Mrs. Inglethorpe. "And you, madam? 47 years is a long apprenticeship to sorrow." "I have my annuity and my memories," she replied. "Some of the memories are even good ones. The rest I shall bury with the master." She hesitated, then added in a voice so low the wind almost stole it, "He was not always cruel, you know. When he was a little boy, he used to bring me snowdrops from the wood. Before he learned that kindness was weakness." Poirot inclined his head, understanding everything she did not say. Outside, Hastings was already installed in the Bentley, rug over his knees, scarf wound twice round his neck. "Well, Poirot," he said as the little detective climbed in beside him, "another triumph for the little gray cells, though I can't help feeling rather sorry for Trevelyan. Dashed fine-looking chap, and all for love?" Poirot settled back against the leather, eyes half closed. "Love, mon cher Hastings? No. Possession. There is a difference as wide as the English Channel. Trevelyan wished to own beauty the way other men own racehorses or paintings. When he discovered beauty preferred its freedom, he destroyed it rather than lose it. That is not love. It is the tantrum of a spoiled child writ large." The car moved off down the drive. Behind them, Vane Abbey dwindled, windows blind, chimneys smoking no longer. Hastings glanced back. "Ghastly place. I shan't be sorry to see the last of it." Poirot did not turn. "Yet it is instructive, n'est-ce pas? A house built on pride and cruelty generation after generation until the very walls dripped venom. And in the end it destroyed itself quite neatly without any help from ancient curses." The Bentley reached the gates and swung onto the high road. The moor rolled away on every side, vast and empty under the low sky. Hastings shivered. "All the same, I'll be glad to get back to London. Hot buttered toast, a decent fire, and no more anonymous letters." Poirot permitted himself a small smile. "You think not?" "My friend, London is full of houses where the clocks have stopped at some private 9 o'clock. We merely choose not to notice." He took a small object from his pocket, the white albatross feather that had betrayed Trevelyan, and turned it thoughtfully in his fingers. "Still, order is restored, the guilty is punished, the innocent set free, the little gray cells vindicated. One cannot ask more of life." He opened the window a crack and let the feather go. The wind caught it, whirled it high above the moor, and carried it away toward the sea. Hastings watched it vanish. "Rather poetic, Poirot." "Poetry, mon ami, is merely truth wearing its Sunday best." The car gathered speed. Ahead, the road dipped toward the distant lights of civilization. Behind, Vane Abbey crouched beneath its naked oaks, secrets buried once more beneath frost and silence. The clocks of the Abbey began to chime the quarter, slow, measured, indifferent, as though nothing of any importance had ever happened within those walls. Poirot leaned back, closed his eyes, and allowed himself the very smallest sigh of satisfaction. "Another case concluded," he murmured. "And the world is a very slightly tidier place than it was a week ago." The Bentley purred on through the bright, cold morning, carrying Hercule Poirot away from the house of the premeditated act, and back toward the comfortable chaos of London, where new murders, new motives, and new triumphs waited with the patience of the inevitable. Behind them, the moor swallowed the last echo of the engine, and Vane Abbey settled into its long sleep.